Hello everyone, it's me again. Welcome back to the soul-crushing experience. Oh boy, it's been a bit since I said that. For those of you who don't know, this is a series I do where I go through my day-by-day progress on a soul-crushing tower and go over my experience, enjoyment, and other things. This time, it's time we go beyond the exosphere and onto the moon, where there lies a terrifying tower, the Tower of Alien Radiance. Yes, you heard me right. My plan was to jump from Tower of Astronomically Aimless Annoyances, a low extreme, to a low mid terrifying, jumping an entire difficulty. It's not the smartest idea I've ever had, but I figured I would try it. So, I guess it's time to see how it went. I started the stream in Zone 6 thinking I would be playing Tower of the Dripping Amalgam as a new hardest. However, after about an hour, plans changed after I realized that the tower was making me lag on stream. So, after a bit of deciding, I figured I might as well try jumping to TOAR. Starting off with an all-jump run, things were going really bad. There were very few jumps I was able to do with ease. Luckily, some of my friends decided to join me to help me out with learning the tower. If things weren't bad enough already though, I decided I want to beat this tower fully legit, meaning no major skips and itemless. Anyways, let's talk about Tower of Alien Radiance's gameplay. It is really gameplay that will help me improve in all fields. The gameplay has some hard wraps, some hard trusses, some super janky and weird gameplay. The second half is super loop failable, while at the same time also being punishing. The tower's hardest floors are 1 to 3 without a doubt. Sure, I was struggling on every floor, but 1 to 3 specifically were very difficult. But I knew this going into the tower, since literally everyone says it's the hardest part. What I wasn't ready for is how hard 8 was for me. It was incredibly difficult. I'll go more into detail on each floor as I started doing each one in a single go. Which I started trying to do immediately after my all-jump run. The all-jump run took me about 45 minutes to complete. The first floor I attempted was floor 10, and my goal was to make my way down through each floor. Floor 10 is by far the easiest floor, but that doesn't mean it was easy for me. The floor is still harder than anything I have tried to do in JTO, so it was still terrifying gameplay. The main thing I needed to keep in mind was if I failed 10. 10 is a net. However, there are 2 pink neon spinners going around the net. The problem with those is that they are insta-kill spinners. If I touch those, everything is over and I restart my run. If I fall, I have to make my way back to the center of the safe net and it will teleport me back to the beginning of the floor. Basically, all I have to do is see if the insta-kill is about to go under me every jump, and if it is, I just have to wait for it to go under me. It took me about 20 minutes to do the entire 10th floor in one go. 20 minutes to do the easiest floor, but it makes sense since it was a lot harder than anything I have done up to this point, and I knew I was going to be on this tower for a good while. I started to do 9 this day as well. 9 has 2 nets, one at the beginning of the floor and one later into it. 9 for the most part isn't too difficult, but there were a couple jumps that I found pretty tricky. The first one being this jump that you climb on a cylinder and avoid the neon teleporter that sends you back a bit. Then the other jump I was scared of was this squeeze to grab a truss. So many things could go wrong for me in this jump. I could be aligned wrong, or I don't make it into the squeeze, or I might just miss the truss completely. A really scary jump that I was afraid of messing up on. I started playing a little bit of 8 for a few minutes, but then ended stream shortly after. The day started with another all-jump run. This one only took me half an hour this time, which was already a big improvement. Well, it is time I talked about floor 8. Floor 8 is probably the hardest of the second half floors for me. These floors are generally easier than the first half, but 8 I find to be extremely difficult. The first really difficult jump is to the truss here. which I used alignment keys for to try to make it consistent. The next hard part for me came after the net, being the cylinder. The jump to the cylinder, although difficult, wasn't what I was struggling with. It was jumping off the cylinder. I would try to grab the edge, and because I didn't have full understanding of cylinder physics, it would drop me because I bounced out too far to grab it. The second net also has some really tricky jumps, like this low ceiling wrap around a cylinder, and the trusses after were pretty scary. The worst part about the second net is that if I fail it, it teleports me back to the first net, meaning I would have to deal with the cylinder once again. I didn't end up doing 8 in one go because I walked off near the very end of 8, but there were no difficult jumps there, so I decided to move on to 7. For the most part, 7 is pretty easy, since you get to the net very early into the floor and everything up to the net is not too hard. The problem comes after the net. 7 unsafe. While not being the hardest part ever, it is extremely scary, since it is pretty easy to lose your run on this part. It's got some very nerve-wracking jumps as well, specifically this ladder cylinder wrap, which is only difficult because of it being a ladder and not a truss. It took me a couple minutes to get through 7 in one go, which felt pretty good. Now for the beginning of the second half, floor 6. 6 begins with the time section, which is netted back down to 5. The timer is very lenient, so as long as you go at a decent pace, there's nothing to worry about. The only notable jump in this section is the last wrap, which my friend showed me an amazing strat. Using alignment keys makes an almost perfect alignment to make the wrap. You just have to turn after jumping. The rest of 6 is pretty easy, but can be pretty scary to do. I ended up doing 6 in one go, meaning that every floor in the second half has been completed in one run. I then had 2 runs in mind that I wanted to do, 6 to 8 in one go, and 7 unsafe to 10. The first one I tackled was 6 to 8. I figured this would be the easiest run out of the 2, since 6 and 7 aren't that hard compared to 8 and 9. The first 7 unsafe attempt from 6 ended in me failing to do a head hitter, and caught myself at the end of 6. The next 7 unsafe, I simply missed the moving platforms. The next 7 unsafe, I basically did the same thing, missing the moving platform. After a bit of 6 and 7, I got past the head hitter from earlier, but ended up failing the cylinder ladder since it dropped me while trying to grab the backside of it. The next 7 unsafe attempt went a lot better, since I ended up doing the run. This to me felt like the first significant progress I had on TOAR. I decided to keep the run going, and see how far I can get. I expected it to end very early, but I actually ended up getting up to the 8 net. A good start, but I still had a lot of difficult jumps to go through. Unfortunately, while trying to jump, I hit space too late and walked off, but only down to 7 unsafe, so I could keep the run going. Turns out, I did pass it, so I was back up to 8 again somehow. And then, I ended up getting back onto the net again. This time, I ended up jumping, and I also ended up passing the cylinder. Not only that, but I got pretty far into the second net. Unfortunately though, I missed grabbing onto the last truss up the section and had to go back to the first net. I ended up getting back to the truss and missed it once again. Then, I missed the cylinder and fell down to 7 unsafe. Maybe I could do it for a third time? Yeah, not likely. And sure enough, I fell. But my goal of 6 to 8 was finished, and I even almost got to 9 from 6. With that, I decided to end my stream on a high note and attempt 7 unsafe to 10 the next day. After a bit of internet issues, it was time to start actually playing TOAR. As normal, an all jumps run was done. Not much to say about it really. After the all jump is where I kicked things off from last time and began attempting 7 unsafe to 10. This run was quite difficult, since I found 8 the hardest floor of the second half as I mentioned, and doing 7 unsafe every time made it a lot harder. It took a little more than half an hour before I got to 9 for the first time from 7 unsafe. Now, I was hoping to just complete 9 on my first go, since there wasn't too much that I struggled to. The main thing is the one squeeze truss, and I actually made it! But I went way too far left after trying to go to the corner, and fell right off to the 8 net. The run was lost shortly after, meaning it was back to 7 unsafe. After another 10 minutes, I had another run that got to 9. Unfortunately, this time I did just fail to jump to the truss. After this, I gave up on the run and went down to 5. Most of 5 was pretty easy, to be honest. There were just 2 main things I had to worry about. The first being the gameplay to the button being rather difficult compared to most of the floor, but the good news is you only have to do it one time, since the button progress stays. The other problem, however, is the fact I have to do 5 minus the button gameplay every time I failed 6. I'd say the rest of 5, there was a small chance of me failing, so the fact I would have to do it every time I failed 6 is a little concerning. Without spending too much time though, I did 5 in one go, including the button gameplay. I wasn't done with the run just yet though, still wanted to see how far I could go. Somehow, I managed to pass 7 unsafe and got to 8. Unfortunately though, I failed to jump to the truss and fell down to the 7 net, but decided to continue the run. I didn't know it at the time, but this was actually good practice for when I got to the second half, although this didn't have nerves accounted for. Once again, I passed 7 unsafe, and then passed the truss jump on 8, meaning this was the new best from 5. I actually managed to get to the 8 net from there too, so the run continued as I approached the cylinder. I got the grab off and managed to get to the next net. Unfortunately, I failed very early into it and was back to the first net of 8. I had the teleporter on the net, meaning I was back down to the beginning of 8 now. I thought this would be the end of the run, but I managed to get back to the net. Unfortunately though, I failed to jump to the cylinder this time, then failed the 7 unsafe spinners, and lost my run from there. However, what a great way to have my first 5 run go. Next up was practicing 4. 4 would be a milestone for me from the beginning, since this is past the first 30 floors, and when the floors start to get easier, meaning I would have a decent chance at a second half run. Of course, I was only playing for the beginning of the floor. For the most part, 4 isn't that difficult. It does have a few things to note, however. The first thing I want to point out is the scary structure where you have to do a weird wrap, where if you go too far out, you hit a thin stud pole. Just after that, it's a really scary wrap where you stand on half studs. It wasn't that hard for me, but I always felt like I would fail it. Approaching the end of 4, you have a small net. After the net is some really scary trusses, and the rest of 4 is pretty easy, just being a few filler jumps. It took me just a few minutes to get 4 in one run, and I was ready to call it a day. Floors 1 to 3 were going to be for tomorrow, since I was starting to feel pretty tired after today. Another old jump to start the day. I'm not going to say it anymore, but just know that every single day of this tower, on or off screen, I did an all jump run to begin. It was time to begin with 3. This is probably the easiest of the first 3 floors, however still a huge challenge. The first truss is muscle memory with where to jump off of. This wrap with the wedge was always scary, but not overly hard. Just treat it somewhat like a walk around. The 3 net wasn't too hard, but I always grabbed the wedge to make sure that I was on the edge of the platform when jumping to the truss. After this was the scariest part of 3, since it was over nothing. The first wrap after grabbing the truss is no problem, but jumping off the wedge is weird because of the physics, so it is kind of muscle memory when judging where to jump from. After the wedge comes a really scary wrap, but it is easy when you flick off the wall. The next wrap around the wedge I did by looking at the bottom corner and wrapping around after jumping. The last header is really dumb, and I really don't know what I did. I just made sure I could land on the platform if I didn't climb it, since that seemed to happen a lot. The net is really easy, and almost the end of 3. The last few jumps are just scary, not really hard. To get onto the wedge, you need to try to be as close to the wall as you can. Then, the last wrap is just a camera control jump. You get used to it the more you do it. After a couple fails after the 3 net, I ended up doing 3 after 30 minutes. I decided to try 4 with 3, but failed 2 jumps in. Next was 2. The thing about 2 is that the gameplay is not that hard, however it is the longest floor of the tower, so the easier gameplay was made up for. The first thing to note is the jump after the first spinner. You don't have to grab the wedge, but I always did because it was really consistent for me. The next jump is a pretty difficult wrap, which I ended up doing in first person since I found it easier to find where to turn. The next part is the button, which wasn't too hard, but was pretty easy to fail still. Then the no jump. It isn't hard at all, but failing it made you lose the button and teleport you back to the beginning of the button round. After that came another wrap I did in first person, then the kill brick spinner wraps. They're not that hard, but don't rush them. Shortly after that is the 2 net. You're almost at the end now, but not quite. Careful of the first 2 jumps since they aren't over the net. You can make it so it is, but it is a lot harder. The cylinder after the net I did in first person. After that is the final part of 2. It's some camera control wrap, which just takes some muscle memory. After all that work, you get 3. I never did 2 in one run, and instead did up to the kill brick spinner, practiced the rest, and began some real runs for the first time. Floor 1 has the hardest raw gameplay in the tower for me. A lot of the jumps felt a little luck-based, but nothing unfair, honestly. The first part is ledge grabs, and it's all muscle memory, honestly. Next was a kinda weird ladder flick. The rest of 1 up until the net isn't too hard, and takes a bit of muscle memory. After the net, however, is this weird truss flick. It took me a while to get used to, but it's just some camera control. Take your time on the last few wraps at the end of 1, even if it is over the safety net. They aren't that hard, but they become a lot more failable when you try to rush them. So now, it's time to get into the real runs. The first good run, I ended up passing the weird flick after the net, then failing one of the wraps after it. I somehow passed the flick again, then passed the wrap I failed. Unfortunately, I didn't get to 2 since I failed the final head hitter. A lot more 1 failing, and it was time for my first 2 run. Unfortunately, it ended pretty fast to the wrap around the block. I still wasn't doing it in first person at this point, but once I started doing it in first person, I rarely failed that wrap. Despite that floor 2 run being kinda early on, I was still failing 1 most of the time. Honestly, I was shocked I was even able to make it to 2, since I had not played 1 or 2 for that long. So, I was expecting to not pass floor 1 very much. However, I did get another 2 run, and I actually did pass the wrap, meaning I had a new PB. Next up was the button, which I had a feeling I would be failing. That did not happen though, and I was on the no jump section. As long as I have the 2 button, I did not want to reset, since I found that button kinda scary. I ended up passing the no jump and failing the very first jump after it. It took about a minute or 2, and I was back up to the second floor once again. And then I immediately failed. It took about 10 minutes though, and I got back up to 2, looking for hopefully another decent run. Unfortunately, I failed the ledge grab right after the jump I failed before. So once again, another 2 run that I absolutely sold on. I got another 2 run a little later, and this one was the worst one yet. I failed to jump off the spinner in time, and I just fell to the bottom. The next 2 run, I missed the jump off the spinner once again, but this time I remembered, just missed it. Then I finally passed the jump after the spinner. Then I passed the wrap as well, meaning I got through the no jump section since I still had the button. Then I passed the first jump after the no jump. This means I had yet another new PB. The next goal was to get to 2 net, which isn't too difficult as long as I didn't rush. Sure enough, I was at the net. Unfortunately, I turned too early on the thin stud though, not getting my jump off, and then ended up falling off the net because of it. I hope I don't, actually get somewhere. Okay, well, that's fine. That was PB, yeah. I don't even care that I failed that, that was good. I was pretty happy with this though, and I was pretty happy with the progress I was making in general. I ended the day after this, since I had to go. So progress on my first day from the beginning of the tower was 2 net, meaning I was already pretty close to 3 as well. Today was an exciting day for me. I was riding the high off the good progress I was making, and hoping to push the PB to 3. It's important to note that I do find 2 a bit harder than 3, since the length makes up for the easier raw difficulty. I almost immediately got to 2 after starting. A great way to start the day. Unfortunately though, I didn't get the button and failed the last jump towards it. I got back up immediately though, and successfully got the button this time. The good news is that 2 does get a bit easier after the button, and I had a good shot at getting to the net. And that logic appears to be accurate, since I did get back to the net. This means I could get another new PB almost immediately starting the day. I did get a new PB, and it was time to face the end of floor 2. It's not too hard, but it is pretty scary since it has a lot of camera control wraps. And unfortunately, I hit the wall in the last wrap, but was lucky enough to catch myself back on the net. Fortunately, I was able to make it back past the net and to the jump I failed before. This time, I managed to get to the 3rd floor, hitting my head on the first jump, and I fell to the net of 2 again. Although a bit upsetting, the run was far from over, and that's floor 3 progress. My run did end after that, however, since I failed the last section of 2 again to a different jump. This was a crazy way to start the day though. Not too long after, I got another run past the no jump section, but failed shortly after, meaning I didn't get to the net. That's when my luck ran out for a bit though, as I started to fail 1 and the beginning of 2 a lot more, which makes sense. Luckily, my luck wasn't all gone, and I got back to 2 net again. I failed the first jump after it though because I had a lag spike, and was back to the bottom yet again. Not too long after though, and I got back up, and it was time for floor 3 once again. This time I actually got on the truss, and began my first real 3 run. It didn't last too long though, since I was too far over on a ledge climb, and missed the jump off of the truss, and back down to the 2 net. I wanted to get to 3 once today, and I managed to get there twice now. I was doing way better on this tower than I ever thought. But I wasn't quite done yet, because I once again got back up to 3. This time I got a new PB too. It was time to see how far I could push the PB. I managed to get to the 3 net. It's only a partial net though, since it teleports you back to the beginning of the floor if you fail. No need to worry about that though, since I ended up passing it. I didn't get much further though, since I ended up failing the wedge on 3, which is one of the hardest jumps on 3 after the net. I am shocked I managed to get there though, since this was only my 5th day, and I was almost past all 3 of the first floors. After a lot of failing 1 and 2 again, I was back up to 3 for the 4th time now. The chances of me getting to 4 were not impossible at this point, and I would be really impressed if I managed to get there already. I ended up passing the first bit of floor 3, and got up to the net once again. This meant I have a chance to push my PB once again. And sure enough, I passed the net, and passed the jump I failed last time. I got to the actual 3 net, meaning I only had a few more jumps to go until I was at 4. The jumps aren't too hard, but they are easily failable, and I get sent back to the first net of 3 if I fail them. But I was gonna do my best to get to 4. And sure enough... Okay, yeah, I'm gonna deafen now. Holy shit, guys. Give me just a second. What the fuck is going on? My first 4 run already. This is past most of the difficulty now. Despite that though, floor 4 is still pretty failable. I was gonna see how far I could take this though. I got past the first structure and made it to the part with the spinning kill brick. This section is super easy, but I was taking my time with it to make sure I didn't fail or die. The next part of 4 is the hardest. And yeah, I wasn't getting past that. I couldn't complain at all though, since I was just shocked I made it to 4 in the first place. I ended my session after that being incredibly happy with the progress I made. The goal for today was to get back up to floor 4. If I can do that, that means I am actually getting more consistent at floors 1 to 3, and yesterday wasn't just a fluke that I made it there. I didn't even have to pass my PB, I just wanted to get back to 4. It took me about 45 minutes to get to 3 for the first time today, and I failed the first truss again. I still wasn't great at the first truss, so failing it wasn't a big shocker to me every time it happened. I did catch myself on 2 net, but wasn't able to get back up to 3 and fell to the beginning. I got back up after about 25 minutes of grinding, and passed the first truss. I was really hoping to get somewhere with this run, since I still was trying to reach my goal. Things were looking good so far, since I had passed the first section, and got to the first net. Passing it, I was then in the hard section of 3 again. This didn't stop me, however, and I was back to the actual net. I had a good shot of getting to 4 now. Facing the final jumps, I was a bit nervous, but tried to keep calm. Sadly though, I failed the camera control jump, which is the last jump of 3, which sent me back to the first net, so I had to do the hard part of 3 again. Despite that, I made it past it again, and was back to the net. I was back at the final jumps again, and looking to get that 4 run. And sure enough, I did get it. The goal was met. I failed the second jump of 4 though. Luckily, I discovered that the first few jumps of 4 were actually netted because of the structuring. I didn't know this up until now, so I was glad that I figured it out. Now, I had begun an actual run on 4. I'd made it back to my PB, and was really hoping I passed it. And I did, but didn't get very far, as I failed the wrap after it, which I think is one of the hardest jumps of 4. I got lucky though, and hit the teleporter at the last part of 3, so I didn't have to do the beginning of 3 again. I actually managed to get back to 3 net again too, so I might have another attempt at floor 4. I had once again failed the final jump of 3 though, and also failed the 3 net, meaning that I got sent back to the beginning of 3. I failed one of the jumps at the beginning too, and fell down to the 2 net. At this point, I started thinking my run was over, and was ready to fall back down to 1. However, I made it back up to 3, then fell off the truss back down to 2 net again. Despite that, I had once again made it back up to 3. This isn't even the loop failable part of TOAR, but I could already see how the second half was going to go for me. I get up, then fall down a bit, back up, and down, and so on. If I was doing it with the first half, then the second half was definitely going to be the same thing, but way scarier. Anyways, I ended up getting past the first part of 3, as well as the net, and the part after the net as well, meaning I once again made it to the end of 3. Remember how I thought this run was over? Well, it was far from that, as I made it to 4 once again. Now I really was trying to get another PB. Although I say that wrap is the hardest part of 4 for me, I don't think it is actually that difficult. And apparently, that was the case, as I ended up passing it, meaning I now had a shot at getting to 5. I made it to the 4 net, meaning that I just had a few scary truss jumps to go, as well as some fairly easy jumps afterward. The problem with the trusses after the net is that they are awkward to flick off, so I was pretty scared of going onto them. I ended up passing it, and I was on the final green floor for the first time. The main thing I was worried about was the button, as I still was struggling with it a bit, although it is still quite a bit easier than everything else up to this point. As I passed the first part of 5, I started getting quite nervous. That didn't stop me though, as I made it to the button gameplay. I got tripped up by a weird jump to a ladder, but was fortunate enough to catch myself at the start of 5. I managed to get back up there as well, meaning I had another shot at getting the button. This time I did catch the ladder and pass the weird section. Now, I just had to be careful, and the button should be mine. Yes! Oh my god! No way! And so, it begins. The second half. It is time to begin loop failing central. After I got some water though. I did a small break after this. I was feeling nervous, although pretty confident since 6 was not that hard of a floor. I passed the time section, meaning a fail could be much worse than the beginning of 5. I made sure I'd remembered every strat, and that I was taking my time, as I did not want to fall below 5 immediately. I was near the end of 6 and had a very close call, but I did manage to save to the beginning of 5. The good news about 5 is that I had the button, meaning I didn't have to do the hardest part of 5 now, so my chances of passing 5 are now much higher. And sure enough, I got back up to 6. I managed to get back up to where I failed, and also passed it, and got up to floor 7 for the first time. 7 was pretty safe for the most part, except for 7 unsafe, which depending on where I fell, could drop me straight to the bottom if I wasn't careful. Although I didn't quite get there, and fell to the end of 5, but managed to get back to 6. The good news is though, that I got back to 7. Not only that, but I got to the 7 net as well. This means I had a guaranteed attempt at 7 unsafe, which I'd gotten to on my first try. I practiced this part a lot, but it still feels like it is a pretty inconsistent part. I ended up passing the cylinder ladder though, which is a great start, but hit my head on the jump after, catching myself halfway through 5. I failed on the 6 timer though, meaning I was back at the beginning of 5. And that's when it happened. Okay. Okay. Not good. This might be problematic. I didn't hit space early enough on the ladder, and dropped down to 2. This was almost certainly the end of my run. The only good thing though, is that I had 5 button progress still, if I was able to get back to 5 that is. Unfortunately, I fell and was back to the beginning. I was still really happy with today, since now my PB is 7 unsafe. Luckily, after a while, I made it back to the 4 net. I had another really good shot at getting to 5, but sold and missed the truss before the weird flicks. Although I was a bit sad about that fail, I'd made some huge progress, and felt like this tower could go down any day. With that though, I ended the day, and was ready to grind some more tomorrow. I was excited for today, because I wanted to get back to the second half again. It took a while, but I got a 4 run after about 40 minutes. Things were going pretty well so far, since I had gotten to the net. Sure enough, I passed the trusses, and the jumps after, meaning it was back to 5. The second half run might be coming sooner than I thought. But then, I hit my head on an extended headed jump on 5, but caught myself on a part after the 4 net. But sadly, I failed one of the jumps and fell back to 3. I failed a stupid jump just before the net of 3, and walked off the net of 2, and was back to the beginning of the tower. It wasn't too long before I was back to floor 4 at least, but it also wasn't long before I fell back down to 3, because I failed a truss flick by being too close to the wall. The good news is that I was able to get back to 4 still, and this time I was able to get past the truss I had failed. And it was my time to fail the trusses at the end of floor 4. But I did catch myself back on floor 3. But later ended up falling down to the 2 net. After a few 3 fails that I didn't go to the bottom on, I got back up to 4 again. This time, I failed a jump that I am shocked that I didn't fail earlier. Once again, I ended up falling to the 2 net. This time, I didn't make it back up to 3 and fell to the bottom. I had yet another 4 run to the net, which I ended up missing the first truss because of a lag spike. It's quite sad, but that 5 run earlier was the best that I had today. The rest was failing 1 to 3, and the odd attempt at 4 that didn't really get anywhere. Today was the only day so far where no progress was made, but it did seem like my consistency at 1 to 3 was better, since I had a lot more 4 runs than the days before. So at least getting to the second half should be easier for tomorrow. Okay, I know I said tomorrow, but I began playing at 12:30 AM, so I hadn't slept yet, but technically it wasn't the next day, but the day after. Anyways, talking about TOAR, I wasn't sure about how today was going to go, since yesterday was a bit rough, and I was starting to think that my second half run was a fluke, because I didn't fail below floor 5 until the run ended after my 7 unsafe attempt. But despite that, I was still hoping I would get to the second half. Just over 15 minutes, and I had already gotten my first floor 4 attempt, which is 3 times faster than my first floor 4 attempt last session. This time when I got to the 4 net, I managed to barely grab the truss, and got up to floor 5 for the 3rd time. This could be a run to 6, as long as I managed to get the button. I passed the jump I failed last time, but fell off the truss after it, but at least it was only down to 4 net. All I had to do was pass the 4 trusses again, which I actually managed to do. Just like that, I was back up to 5 to try to get the button once again. Although I had a bit of a risky save before the button path, I managed to get to the button route. This is going to make or break a second half run, so I knew I had to take it slow and be careful. I passed the ladder in the truss part, meaning that the gameplay was a lot easier, then grabbed the button, meaning it was time for round 2 at the second half. This second half run started a lot more risky than the first one, since I failed the 6 timer section, meaning I had to do 5 again. But, as I said last time, 5 with the button is a lot easier, since getting the button is the hardest part of 5. With that in mind, I passed 5 and attempted the 6 timer again, with more success this time, but I still ended up failing. It's okay though, since I got back to 6 again, and attempted the timer once more, with much more success this time, and I actually passed it after nearly falling off the funnel wedge. Now for the rest of 6, which is much easier than the time section, and thankfully I made it to 7 once again. I wasn't really sure if I could get a new PB, since I had to pass the hardest part of 7 unsafe again, but I mean, I fluked it before, who's to say I couldn't pass it again? And I actually did manage to pass it, and get a new PB, and also the no jump section. This meant that I had my first 8 attempt. This is where the second half gets rough. Not only are my nerves higher because I have 2 more floors to go, this is also one of the hardest floors for me in the entire tower. I had low expectations, and I had terrible results, failing the second jump. Although it looks netted, you can only catch yourself halfway through 7 unsafe, which I did, but at least I was able to pass it again. So I was back up there. Passing that jump, it was time for me to tackle the truss. I didn't expect to pass it, but I managed to. Just a couple more jumps until I was at the net, and they aren't that hard. Thankfully, I wouldn't throw, and it was time for the 8 net. Problem with 8 net is that it is a temporary break before the hardest part of 8. I passed the net the first try, and it was on to the unsafe part. Thankfully, I passed the first few jumps, but got dropped on the cylinder by being too far out, resulting in me being at the start of 7 unsafe. That cylinder is the worst part of the tower, because I found it kind of inconsistent no matter where I tried grabbing it from. After this, I took a pretty scary fall, failing the no jump section of 7 unsafe down to the start of 5. Took a couple tries, but I made it back to 7 net after having my heart skip a few beats. Now it was back to 7 unsafe, where I was hoping to get back up to 8 again. I passed the cylinder ladder as well as the cylinder walk around, and thankfully, the rest of the unsafe. Don't know how, but I somehow had passed the 8 truss as well, giving me a good shot at getting back to the net, which I took advantage of. Before attempting the unsafe, I had watched my friend's strat for grabbing the cylinder. I made it back and gave it a try, and it worked. This meant I was on the 2nd net, which if you fail, brings you back to the 1st net. Things were going surprisingly well, passing some of the hardest jumps of the net. I approached the end of the net too. There's no way I would fluke it, right? Yeah, that's right, because I walked off. For some reason, my chat started calling 8 net the donut. I mean, it kinda looks like one, so I guess I get it. Either way, you're gonna see people spamming donut emojis whenever I get here now. Passing the net, I ended up grabbing the cylinder and jumping off of it onto the truss. I jumped off the truss the wrong way by accident and had to jump down to the donut. I didn't have to, but I was too scared to jump over to the other structure to hit the progress stealing bricks. Another 8 unsafe attempt, and I passed it. The exact same thing happened though. Back to the donut again. For the next unsafe attempt, it went successfully again, and I passed the truss after it too. This means it was time for another attempt at the 2nd net. Once again, passing the hardest jump of it, things were looking pretty good. This time I didn't walk off and grab the truss. I jumped off, and it was time for the final unsafe floor. If I passed 9, I basically beat the tower if I was patient enough. Passing 9 net first try, I began the first part of 9. Things seemed to be going well. No, why? Why? I didn't grab the cylinder and fell to 8. Now I had to get past 8 again. Things started going downhill and I failed to jump before the truss down to the 7 net. The run was far from over, but that's a very upsetting fail. Having to do 7 unsafe every time I wanted to attempt the hardest floor in the second half is only asking for trouble. And then I finally failed the cylinder, falling to the end of 5. Took a small break after this, since I was really nervous, and every fail felt like I was going to fall to the very bottom, no matter how many structures were below me. Getting back to things, I had a very close call here on 6, catching myself on a very small platform at the end of 5. After a lot of loop failing, I finally managed to pass 7 unsafe again and got to 8. Passing the scariest truss in the tower once again, I managed to get back to the donut. Another successful 8 unsafe attempt, and I ended up failing this weird jump. I find this to be the hardest jump on 8, so only failing this now was more surprising than me failing it. Yet another successful 8 unsafe attempt, and I failed the exact same jump. The next 8 unsafe attempt, and I was trying to line up the cylinder and slipped off, back to 7 unsafe, which I luckily managed to pass yet again, and made it back to the donut. Eventually passing it, and 8 unsafe, I slipped off a thin stud on the 2nd net. The next 8 unsafe attempt, I walked off the 7 unsafe yet again. I ended up going out of ghost mode before jumping, and it was time to loop fail some more. Or at least that's what I thought. I actually got back up to 8 first try. Luckily, I was back to the donut as well. Getting back to the second 8 net, I managed to pass the jump I was failing before. A very scary slip off this truss, and I was back to 7 unsafe yet again. And I was back up to 8 again. Can you see why I say the second half is loop fail central? Anyway, I made it back to the donut, then passed the unsafe once again. I was really hoping for another 9 run, since I felt a bit robbed of my last fail. Unfortunately, I failed the hard jump again, back to the donut. This time on 8 unsafe, I ended up not getting onto the cylinder from the jump before it, going back to 7 unsafe once again. And I failed my old PB on 7 unsafe because of my pinky twitching and hitting shift, dropping me down to 5. Took a bit, but I got back up to 8. It wasn't long on 8 though, that I missed the jump before the truss, barely catching myself on the 7 net. I made it back up to 8 again though. But I failed the first jump again and had to go back down to 7 unsafe. I got back up and did the same thing. Barely making it the third time, and I managed to get back to the donut. I failed to stick out on the second net, but ended up catching myself, so I was back to the donut again. This time when doing 8 unsafe, I slipped off the cylinder once again. Even the most consistent strats on it seemed to be slightly inconsistent. After a few 8 fails and a fall down to 6, I was once again at the donut. This time I made it to the second net, but failed the hardest part yet again. When trying to do 7 unsafe, I slipped off the cylinder ladder, way down to 5. Thankfully, I made it back up to 8 again somehow. I failed the first jump, so jumped back down to 7 unsafe, and then failed the walk around again down to 6, and somehow jumped off the progress stealing bricks, meaning I didn't have to do 5 again. Once again, I was back up to 8 for the 700th time now, or something like that. I failed the jump before the truss again, and was even closer to missing the 7 net this time around. I ended up failing 7 unsafe though, and decided to have a small break to eat something. And after that, things went really bad. That is not the chocolate buff. No. I tried to get back up for a couple minutes, but eventually gave up. As devastating as that fail was, I at least managed to get to 9. The end was definitely closing in. Today I was hoping it would be the last. Not that I was not enjoying the tower or anything, but I was really hoping I would be able to finish it off once and for all. Things were off to a rough start, with my first floor 4 run being about 50 minutes in. I wasn't gonna let that discourage me though, since this could be a second half run right here. It wasn't. I failed because I climbed something and jumped off it. This fail was stupid because I knew that could happen, and I should have treated it like a head hitter. Back to square one. Luckily, another 4 run took place just under 20 minutes later. This one going a lot better, with me getting to floor 5. Once again, I got to the button section and ended up failing the last flick, but only to the beginning of 5. Although it was a good save, I unfortunately had to do the entire button section again. Luckily, I didn't fail it, and was ready to start the second half. After a bit of loop failing, I had my first 8 run. Sadly, I didn't get to the donut, not because of the hard truss, but the truss after it. A sad fail, but I did get back to 8 however. I failed the hard truss for the first time in a real run somehow. I got back up again though, and this time I did make it to the donut. But yet another 8 run lost to the cylinder slipping me off. I got caught on a walk around on 7 unsafe and had to climb back up from 5. Luckily, that's exactly what I did, and I was back up to 8 after a bit. Not for long though, as I ended up walking off to 7 net. Getting back up to 8, and I failed the jump before the truss jumped yet again. Failing another walk around on 7 unsafe, and it was climbing from 5 time again. I was successful in getting back to 8, and even got to the donut. This time I passed 8 unsafe, and was far into the second net. So far, in fact, that I ended up passing it, getting to 9 for the second time. I was starting to feel the nerves once again. I had a really close call when jumping off the ball, since I didn't turn enough to grab the ladder, but caught myself on 9 still. That makes for 2 floor 9 fails. I got back to the ball and grabbed the ladder again. Unfortunately, I had a really bad fail when getting off the ladder, and ended up holding for too long, walking off to 7 unsafe, 3 floor 9 fails. I managed to get back up to 8 donut after that. Around now, I began feeling a bit nauseous from the nerves going up and down. That wasn't going to stop me though, and I ended up getting back to 9. This time after the ball, I ended up not grabbing the cylinder once again, and was back down to the beginning of 8. 4 floor 9 fails. It's sad I kept failing to 9, especially to what I was failing, but it seemed like I was getting better at 8 this time around, so it wasn't the end of the world. Getting back to the donut, then getting back to the second net, and once more getting back to floor 9. Once again, I got back to the same PB jump. This time things went differently though, and I ended up grabbing the ladder. Got to the other end of it quickly so I didn't hit the teleporter, and shimmied down the cylinder to grab the neon ladder at the bottom. Then, it was time for some trust gameplay. And thankfully, I made it to 9 net. There is only one hard jump after this, and it was the weird trust jump from way earlier in the video. Remember that? Yeah. Well, that's what I had to get through. And unfortunately, I didn't quite get far enough to grab the truss, and fell to the donut again. 5 floor 9 fails. Unfortunately, after failing the second net a few times, I failed 8 unsafe down to 7 unsafe. I made it back up to 8 and eventually made it back to the donut. This time on the second net, I ended up passing it once again, getting back to floor 9. I passed the weird cylinder ladder once again, and ended up back onto the 9 safety net for another attempt at the truss. This time, I caught it. This was it, the final stretch. The rest of 9 is not that hard, and the end is so close. I just had to stay calm and focus. Oh my god! Oh my god! I need to calm down. My hands are going numb at the moment. I am not in a state to try this floor. I know I said I'm gonna take it safe, but I need a second. Oh my god. We're here, guys. We're at the end game. We're at the end game. Passing 9 made me have a feeling I have never had before in JTO. I was out of breath, my hands went numb, and I had to take a small break. This was the end. All I had to do was be patient and pass the final floor. This is it, the final floor. Look down. The neon spinner will kill you instantly. If you fall, you have to make it to the middle without dying. It's as simple as that. I had a safety net and just had to avoid the pink neon spinner. Floor 10 was by far the easiest floor, and I knew I could do it. This was basically a victory lap, and after 20 minutes, I finally reached the win pad. Three, 2, 1. It's been done. Oh my god. Dude. Tower of Alien Radiance. And with that, Tower of Alien Radiance has fallen, and I have officially passed the terrifying border. This was the final tower that I really wanted to complete in Johto, finishing my own dream trilogy, being Tower of Bent Trauma, Tower of Astronomically Aimless Annoyances, and now, finally, after 5 months since my first soul crushing, the Tower of Alien Radiance. I think this is by far the best tower to do as a first terrifying. It tests you on so many skills, like Purism, Client Objects, Jank, Strats, Punishment, Loop Failing, and Nerve Control, just to name a few. Just because you can pass floors 1 to 3 doesn't mean you're going to have a breeze with this tower. Sure, 5 to 9 are much easier, but you'll be loop failing them and having to control nerves the whole time as well, with every fail feeling like you're about to fall right to the bottom. Well, it is time to get into the rankings. When rating a tower, I rate a tower out of 2 categories, gameplay and enjoyment. As usual, I will begin with the gameplay. The gameplay in the tower is, for the most part, pretty janky and strat heavy. It's a lot less janky than Bloodthirsty Kinos, however, and feels a lot less awkward to do. It also gets quite consistent, especially with good strats and alignments. I really enjoyed almost every part of the gameplay in this tower. The only problem, and I mean the only one, is that one cylinder on floor 8. That is the only thing that seems to never get consistent and will just drop you if it is having a bad day. But despite that, I give this tower a perfect 10 out of 10 in gameplay. And now for enjoyment. This tower has without a doubt been the most fun I have ever had in Johto. The grind never felt too long or too short. It was never too easy or too hard. It provided a perfect challenge and also had incredibly fun gameplay. There wasn't a moment in this tower where I was actually feeling annoyed, other than losing a second half run, which is more of a quick burst of sadness. I wouldn't even say it bothered me. And because of that, I give the enjoyment a perfect 10 out of 10 as well, giving the Tower of Alien Radiance the first 20 out of 20 I have ever given a tower, and I think that it truly deserves it, being my favorite tower that I have played so far. To those of you who are around for the full grind, thank you so much. You got to watch me go from fresh out of the easiest 3 extremes to going headfirst into a low-mid terrifying and coming out on top. And if you stuck around after, you might also know that I ended up beating my second terrifying tower, being the Tower of Impossible Movement. I will let you all know right now that there is probably not going to be a soul-crushing experience on that tower, since this one is taking me a really long time. With that said, I have 2 more terrifyings to go, one being the hardest, and I do plan on making a soul-crushing experience for that. In the meantime though, thank you all so much for watching. I put a lot of time and effort into this video, and I want this one to be my best video yet, and I hope that shows. If you like this, I recommend you check out some of the other Soul Crushing Experience videos, although they're starting to get a bit old now, especially the Double Trouble one. If you want to watch me progress, I stream almost every day, and will probably start grinding more SCs now that this video is out. Thank you all again, and I will see you all next time.